Joining me now, a criminal defense attorney and former prosecutor Titus Nichols, and University of New Haven law professor Mike Lawlor. Gentlemen, thank you so much for being with me this evening.
Glad to be back on.
Fantastic. Titus, let me start with you. I want to get your impressions of today, but specifically pointing to today's evidence. As I said earlier, I thought it was extremely important for the House managers to begin to make these connections and have people understand, at least from their point of view, how the president's words and actions, not only of the day of January 6th, but also going as far back as almost a year before, led to what happened that day. Do you think they accomplished their goal?
I believe they did, Michael. I mean, it's very important to understand that the goal of the Democrats is to be methodical and to lay out the evidence in a very clear, linear fashion. Of course, they know that the necessary 17 Republicans are not going to do their responsibility and hold Donald Trump accountable. But what they're doing is preserving the record so that those who come after them will understand exactly what happened, how deadly it was, and that there's absolutely no question it was an act of treason. Pointing the direct connection between Donald Trump's words and his actions to the insurrectionists, it's showing that there's no question that he was the person that incited the mob and led them to this deadly attack.
This is not a criminal trial. This is a political exercise which is called for by the United States Constitution. It's a different ballgame when you violate that oath. Plus, the consequences of being convicted by the Senate are not that you go to prison. It's just, in this particular case, that you might be prohibited from holding office going forward.
Now, Titus, one of the things, as Mike just mentioned, what happens here is you don't go to prison. You might not be able to hold office. You certainly have the historical record of your actions. Is a criminal court the right forum for some of his actions? Is that the right way to handle this?
Trump's legal argument of this being an incorrect form is a red herring. It's legally constitutional for other jurisdictions to launch their own investigations into Donald Trump for the various crimes. Donald Trump's problem is that he's committed so many crimes in so many different places that he's going to have to deal with a lot of different jurisdictions even after the impeachment is concluded. In regards to the impeachment, as my colleague just said, it is a creature of politics. It is in the Constitution. It is designed to hold the president accountable because he has such unique powers and authority that the impeachment process is designed to ensure that the president does not believe that they are all powerful and that they cannot be punished or reprimanded when they abuse their authority. Here, Donald Trump used the last month in office to lead an insurrection against the Capitol. If he is not impeached, if he is not held accountable, then what is to stop the next leader from using their position in such an abusive fashion?
I think it's a fantastic thing that they're doing here for these police officers. There can be no question that what they suffered was just an incredible injustice. But this whole saga involving the police really was a big part of the emotional part of the House manager's case, Titus. And I think it was extremely important to make sure that these lawmakers understand it wasn't just you that was under siege here. These were the folks on the front lines.
Michael, absolutely. I agree. I think what's also important is that each senator who refuses to vote of guilty against Donald Trump needs to explain how is it they can watch law enforcement officers put their lives on the line, be sacrifice parts of their own body, and yet they still give Donald Trump a pass. They refuse to hold Donald Trump accountable for leading the insurrection. It really just goes to show that those politicians who refuse to hold Donald Trump accountable put their political futures above the actual physical safety of law enforcement officers. And it's a shame because law enforcement officers, they get up every morning, put on their uniform and go out the door to save and protect the lives of the same politicians who are more afraid of Donald Trump than of doing the right thing for those law enforcement officers.
They didn't address the election at all. And that's still an issue out there, this idea that he lied about the election and the fact that maybe they should have presented some evidence to show that, this election was fair. And this election went off exactly how it was meant to go off and no one is being disenfranchised. Because I think that really gets to the root of the anger of some of those people we saw in that video.
Well, Michael, I think it was a good strategy for them to focus on the violence of the insurrection because that is what happened. It was an insurrection. It was treason. Never before had the Confederate flag ever been flown inside of the U.S. Capitol. So by focusing on the violence, focusing on the beating of law enforcement, focusing on them invading the state capitol, U.S. Capitol, and then threatening to hang the Vice President Mike Pence. That is, as a prosecutor, we would always say, focus on primacy and recency. You want to focus on what is going to get the most attention, what's going to really tug at the heartstrings, and more importantly, make people pay attention to the message you're trying to send to them. And the message they're sending is that this wasn't about election. This wasn't about difference of opinions amongst politicians. This wasn't about constituents feeling one way or angry because their particular candidate lost. This was about violence. This is about a violent uprising that led to the death of 5 people. And by focusing on the violence, you're moving the senators away from a potential defense of, well, there's still some questions about what happened in the election. You can't argue about the violence you see in front of you. You can't argue about seeing Vice President Mike Pence and his family being whisked away by Secret Service just moments before the invaders get to his portion of the U.S. Capitol. So by focusing on the violence, focusing on the rage, that's going to drive the point home much more clear.
Oh, excellent points. All right, Titus, thank you very much. Guys, stand by. We're going to take a quick break. Criminal defense attorney and former prosecutor Titus Nichols and University of New Haven law professor Michael Lawlor. And Mike, I want to start with you. What is the real issue here? The issue is that when you promote violence, people think that's their only option, and they immediately want to go to that option when there are other options in a democracy, the correct options. Do you agree or disagree?
Oh, for sure. One thing that always bothered me, here in Connecticut, we had a lot of debates about gun control over the years. And oftentimes you would have people who are gun advocates testifying, and a lot of times they would essentially make the argument that the reason that the Constitution allows them to have guns is because they need them as the ultimate solution to a political problem. The solution to that problem is at the voting booth. We have now a constitution, and we have courts, and we have elections, and we have the Congress. That's, even though we don't agree oftentimes with the decisions that are made, that's the process by which you make change.
Mike, can I chime in briefly?
Yeah,
Michael,
absolutely. I was going to give you that opportunity.
Michael, one thing we also have to address is the fact that this far-right extremism, white nationalism, anti-authoritarian streak didn't begin with Donald Trump. If you go back to the 90s with Ruby Ridge, with the Waco and Branch Davidians, with the Oklahoma City bombing with Timothy McVeigh, you see this same pattern of anti-government, white nationalism, far-right extremism that Donald Trump simply took advantage of and promoted for the support, because he knew those types of people supported every ridiculous thing that he said, every bigoted thing that he said. And you also saw that there was support from it within the Republican Party. This wasn't something that Donald Trump just created himself. The issue is that it has now turned on the Republican Party as well as the Democrat Party as well. And that has led to a violent attack against the seat of government. But unfortunately, to say that it's Donald Trump that was leading them on is simply ignoring the much bigger and pervasive problem that Donald Trump didn't start it, and it's going to continue long after he's no longer running for any type of office.
And Titus, I know you're passionate about some of these issues that we're talking about, and I'm going to get your impression as to what do you think we should do about this problem. You mentioned earlier, this didn't just begin with President Trump. He was just able to sort of stoke something that had been going on for quite a while. So is there a political solution to this, and how do we move forward from it?
Well, Michael, I think it's simple. They're a bag of deplorables. I mean, and let's be very clear. You can be a Republican, you can be a conservative, but that doesn't make you a Trump supporter. If you are a Trump supporter, then that means you support bigotry, you support xenophobia, you support general incompetence, and you support treason. And I think the bigger issue is mixing the idea of supporting Trump is supporting the Republican Party. The Republican Party has been hijacked by Trump. All the values that they stood for, small government, shrinking the budget, those were thrown away once Donald Trump became the leader. And you have seen his priorities as a leader have just been absolute catastrophes, just rampant incompetence. Those people who voluntarily went down to the Capitol did so because they believe in Trump's incompetence. Those people who stood out in the freezing cold to chant "Stop the Steal" did so because they wanted to support Donald Trump's lie. And those people who invaded the Capitol chanting "Hang Mike Pence" and "Shoot Nancy Pelosi in the head" are deplorables. Now, what their reason is, that's up to them. But the fact remains, you have an element in this country who embraces this type of chaos, who embraces invading the Michigan State Capitol, who actually plotted to kidnap a sitting governor. This is not something that can be relieved by simply saying, hey, let's sit down and listen to everybody's concerns. This is a clear and present threat that must be treated as such.
Did Titus just make the argument for President Trump? The fact that these folks were down there with their own minds and they had their own ideas about what they wanted to do? It sounded like it a little bit to me there, Titus. I'm going to give you a chance to answer that as well when we come back. Right now, we're going to take a break. Now, Mike, I'm going to go to you first, and Titus, I'm absolutely going to give you a chance to respond, but I'm going to go back to what you were saying about the folks that were acting in this way out there, that were violent, that perhaps this had been around for a long time. These people had this type of thing on their mind. So, Mike, my question was, does that support the argument that the defense is going to make that, look, these are folks that were out there, they're already angry, they have issues, they've had it long before Donald Trump came around.
In addition to all of the historical context that was pointed out by the managers, keep in mind what was the goal that day. That day was selected by Donald Trump. He organized that rally outside the White House. He invited people to come. And his goal that day was, when all else fails, I want these people to go to the Capitol and stop the acceptance of the Electoral College votes, right? I mean, that was the whole point. And when it became clear that Vice President Pence was not going to do something he clearly doesn't have the authority to do, then the only other option was to have people just shut it down, which is what they did. And that's what's called insurrection, right? And so, when you investigate a criminal case or you make an argument as a prosecutor, you want to talk about means, motive, and opportunity. But here, motive is the most important thing. It was clearly designed to delay that vote for as long as possible.
Well, I think the only reason that Donald Trump's been given any benefit of the doubt is because he's the former president of the United States. Let's say we were talking about an attack that involved people of Middle Eastern descent. Nobody would be saying, well, this person just did this attack on their own. They'd be looking for what radicalized that person. Oh, well, this person was radicalized because of online videos. They were radicalized by this group that posts on the internet. But because it involves individuals who are not Middle Eastern descent, now there's this extra consideration of, well, maybe they just did it on their own. Maybe Donald Trump didn't lead them to the violent attack. But the reality is, Donald Trump knew what he was doing. Donald Trump's been on this earth for over 70 years. He knows what happens when you call together a large crowd of people in favor of a lie. He knows what happens when you stand on a podium and get them whipped up and say, we are going to march down to the Capitol. He knew exactly what they're capable of. He knew that they were building a noose outside of the rally they were putting together. He knows the violence that has taken place, the people that have been beaten at his own rallies that have taken place all across the country. For him or his lawyers to say that he did not know that this mass gathering would turn violent is ridiculous.
All right, that's a pretty good summation of the case that we saw from the House managers over the last couple of days. We'll see if it wins the day. Before we go, we only have a little bit of time left, gentlemen. I want to ask you, in my impression of the evidence, it's the lack of remorse part that I think is powerful. The fact that he didn't do anything for so long after this thing was going on, after a co-equal branch of government was under attack. So, Titus, I want to get your response to that.
Well, I think they're doing that in order to show this man has absolutely no remorse for his actions at all. And the reason why he has no remorse is because he intended to do this. If you were to be falsely accused of inciting a riot that led to the death of 5 people, most normal people with a conscience would be front and center, showing remorse, showing sympathy, trying to show support to the family of the loved ones, actually being at the funeral of Officer Sicknick. But instead, you have Donald Trump retreating back to Mar-a-Lago because he knows that he is responsible for this. And his legal team has told him every time he opens his mouth, he's facing more and more criminal exposure from various jurisdictions. So by pointing out his lack of remorse, it's hammering the fact home that Donald Trump is responsible for this, and he knows he's responsible for this, yet he doesn't care.
Well, gentlemen, it's been a real pleasure to have you. Titus Nichols, Mike Lawlor. I had a wonderful time discussing with you. I hope you'll come back and join us again.
Anytime.
Thanks for having me again.
All right, appreciate that.